Welcome to Clinton School Presents on KBR 89.1, a weekly dialogue with the distinguished guests that visit the Clinton School of Public Service in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm your host, Nikolai DePippa, the school's Director of Public Programs, and we sat down with Dale Erquiaga, President and CEO of Communities in Schools. Communities in Schools is a national organization that ensures all students have what they need to stay in school and on a path to a brighter future. Founded more than 40 years ago, Communities in Schools today works directly inside more than 2,500 schools and community sites across 26 states and the District of Columbia. We start our discussion with Dale describing where he grew up.
So I was born and raised in Nevada in the West. My mother and father were born in this country, but their siblings were born in Spain. My family is Basque, which is why I have such a difficult to pronounce last name. I grew up in rural Nevada. My dad was a sharecropper. My mom was a housewife. And public education was a big part of our life growing up. They had high expectations for us. And I think, although I never would have planned the career that I ended up with, I think that commitment from my family, that education was a way to get ahead. That's why they came to this country. I think that's what put me on this path.
What'd you want to be?
So growing up, I first wanted to be a journalist. And then I took a bunch of journalism classes. My first job was in town, as we said, because we lived in the country. I worked for the town newspaper. Went to college, took a bunch of classes, decided I didn't want to be a journalist, spent the whole time arguing with my professors that the First Amendment was not the right to be irresponsible, which they believed it was. And so I ended up in a career in politics. I started covering local government, and then my very first job when I graduated, I actually worked for the Reagan administration. Hope that's okay to say here in Clinton country. That was a long time ago. So I spent a lot of time in politics, but always with a communications focus.
Yeah, talk about that kind of path, career path, and it is a mixture of public and private sector.
Yeah, I always hate to be introduced because it sounds like I'm either 100 years old or I can't hold a job because I've moved around so much. But I think that many people's careers actually do that, and particularly today. You know, they tell me young people are not going to have a job that they will have for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And my own career, as I said, started out in politics and communications. I think I got every job for a while because I could write and other young people couldn't write. So I really give credit to my teachers for giving me those skills in the English language. I spent some time in private life. I worked at an advertising agency, but our advertising agency had a government affairs arm. And so I was always in and out of either federal government or state government or in the communications sector, but always around public policy, public service. I was, I think, driven towards public service. I didn't know it at the time. As I look back now and as I talk to young people, I'm really grateful for the leg up I got in life. And I think that for me, public service was a way to give back. And it felt fun because they were relying on me for communication skills. And then I figured out how to change laws. When I was a deputy secretary of state, I actually ran elections for a while. And actually seeing your work move through a legislative body, go into practice, and then see that it changes how voters turn out at the polls or how they register, where I started, was really just great fun and very gratifying.
Biggest difference between public and private sector for you?
Boy, that's a tough one. The easy answers are in public sector, people are a lot meaner to you than they are in private life. But I also never worked in a private business where I had a frontline customer service job. I was never a bank teller. I never waited tables. I think we're pretty rude to service help in this country, just the way we're often rude to bureaucrats. I think the real difference is hopefully those in public service have a very long view. I always felt in every job that I was a steward. I was in somebody else's desk, quite literally, because you walk in and there's nothing in your desk. It's just somebody else's desk if you serve an elected official. And then when you leave that desk. Private life doesn't feel like that to me. I've done both. And private life felt either you were beholden to shareholders or you were beholden to the people who owned the business. You had a much shorter event horizon. You had to look at profit. You had to look at markets. And when I've done it right, I guess, in public service, I've played the long game. I have said to bosses, I've served a number of elected officials, and I have said, look, this isn't going to happen on your watch. We'll be old when this actually shows results, and we're just going to have to live with that. Not all politicians want to do that. I was really lucky that I worked for some who were willing to play the long game. So I think that's the primary difference.
your first introduction to community in schools?
So it's a very funny story. I worked in the Las Vegas school district, and I sort of knew who they were. I worked on the policy side of the shop. I'm not trained as an educator, so I sort of knew who they were. Successful program. I knew they did great things. I went on in my career to work for a governor, and when I became his superintendent of public instruction, the education chief job in the state, communities in schools actually came to me to request an appropriation. They wanted an earmark. I didn't really believe in earmarks. I'm not a big fan of them because I saw me having to defend a couple of earmarks that my governor had instituted, and I was always playing catch up with legislators who might want to punish the governor or make a change. Earmarks are often hard. And so I refused to give them an earmark and said, look, we're not going to do that here. And so instead we created a set-aside program called Victory Schools. The governor actually named them. And they're schools focused on children who live in poverty. As a practical matter, I think over 90% of the kids in communities and schools qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So it's a poverty intervention. And we created a formula and a needs assessment process so that monies would flow to those schools and they would go to providers, maybe communities and schools, maybe other organizations who could qualify and could deliver evidence-based practice. So my very first interaction was to say no.
Yeah, I guess it didn't hold it against you.
They let me go, right? They forgave me for that. And I think, honestly, it's been good for the organization. That program in my home state of Nevada today contributes greatly to the 58 now communities and schools campuses where we are present in the Silver State. And I also think it's a lesson about sustainability and earning your public dollars and having an evidence base to qualify for those dollars. As the guy who used to hand out the money, I always say, I am proud of the program that I represent today because I have an evidence base that proves to my customer, a school district or a state department, often, that they'll get results if they follow this model correctly.
So what's Community in Schools?
So Communities in Schools is the nation's largest and most effective dropout prevention program. It's the easiest way to think about it. That's how we started. Started in high schools, catching in those days young men after they had left school. But President Jimmy Carter, when he was governor of Georgia, actually put the program inside Georgia schools. And then when he moved to Washington, he took the program with him. And for many years, probably 2 decades, the program was a collection of what we would today call wraparound services: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, brokered almost all on philanthropic dollars, some public money, into schools by someone we call a site coordinator. Bill Milliken, the founder of my organization, calls them human routers. They serve a central role inside a school to deliver the right resource at the right time to a youth when he or she is most at risk of exiting school. Over the last 42 years, which is how long we've been around, we've grown out of high schools. We now are in as many elementary and middle schools as we are high schools. So we have pre-K through 12th grade kids. In a couple places in America, we are on community college campuses where at-risk youth have progressed to post-secondary education, but they still have faced many of the same barriers. And the way I describe that for folks, because it seems weird that I talk about first graders as dropout prevention, dropping out is a process. It's not an event. And those behaviors begin pretty early with young people. It may be related to the fact that they're hungry and so they perform poorly on tests. It may be related to their family. Someone in their family is incarcerated or is a victim of domestic violence or is addicted to opioids today. And so they experience these adverse childhood events that stack up as trauma and eventually toxic stress. And that causes them to cease to attend school or to act out if they do attend schools. So today we work as much with attendance and behavior issues as we do academic supports, but always based on a need assessment of that school's need and then the individual student need.
And the kind of overall problem, and so kind of lay out how big of an issue is dropping out, and what does that do to the community as well?
Yeah.
What's the kind of the compounding effect of that?
Yeah, I think you asked the really important question because it's easy to think about at-risk youth or opportunity youth, depending which label you use, as somebody else's kid. But the fact is, still today, 1 in 5 kids is likely to exit school before they're supposed to. They're not going to complete all the way through, even though we've managed to raise the graduation rate to its highest level really ever since we've been recording those. Kids who face poverty, kids who face segregation, kids who face these barriers related to trauma at home are more likely to exit. Well, if they exit school, they go somewhere. They may go to a behavioral school, or they may enter the criminal justice system. However they move through that phase in their life, they're never going to be contributing to their community's economy in the same way that someone with a high school graduate does. Or if I get a high school diploma and then I move on to post-secondary career or a college or career education, I'm simply going to have a higher income. All the data tells us that. And so folks who leave school too early and don't build those skills about life success will end up on public assistance if they don't end up in the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, in our country, many of those statistics track very closely with race as well as family economic mobility. And so we see in our data, young black men are referred to us for behavior issues more than young white men. That's just a fact of the data. And so those young men are on a course to eject them from school because they don't have the skills to function there, and their school environment might not have a trained adult who can deal with their issues. So all of those components come together for me to say, this isn't just about that one youth. It isn't just about the Latina girl in Texas or the African-American boy here in Arkansas or the poor white rural kid where I grew up. It's about the whole community having to contribute to that child's success because we need productive adults in our communities as well.
So how's it work?
So in our model, if you're an educator, you've heard of something called a multi-tiered system of supports. I was once told by a boss, it sounds like I have to pay taxes every time I listen to you, Dale, when you get to the end of a sentence. A multi-tiered system of supports is, in our model, very simple. We deliver some services to every kid at the school, so that's a tier 1. For us, that's often a food bank or a college fair, easiest to think of that. Our evidence says that we should do between 4 and 6 of those school-wide interventions over the course of the year. And it also tells us that it changes the school climate to have those school-wide Tier 1 events. Tier 2 events, a subset of our students are case managed. Tier 2 is case managed typically in groups, and then Tier 3 is really intensive case management. We try to case manage about 10% of the kids in a school. So if you have a school of 1,000 kids, they're all going to receive a Tier 1 dosage. Groups are going to receive some level of a little more intensive dosage. And then about 100 kids in that school will be case managed. And those problems could be mental health, it could be physical health, it could be providing academic supports like a mentor or a tutor. It's tailored to the need of that child. That goes on over the course of the year. We use a data system to align our data, so our kids set goals, we track their grades, we monitor their attendance, we keep track of their behavior records. And so we know by the end of the school year that in our program, 99% of our kids progress to the next grade, where ordinarily large numbers of them would have exited school or dropped out. And if we are able to manage children over a period of years and into high school, 93% of my kids graduate from high school. Again, a significantly higher number than folks from our demographic or socioeconomic status would normally be graduating from school.
You're listening to Clinton School Presents, and I'm Nikolai DePippa. Our guest is Dale Erquiaga, President and CEO of Communities in Schools. The range of adverse childhood events or services that you're offering is very, very wide.
Very wide. And the thing that we love about our model for Communities in Schools is that it too, like the dropout world, is a process. And so that process might look different at a high school here in Little Rock from a middle school in Reno, Nevada, or an elementary school in Austin, Texas, because it's based on the needs of that school. When the work is integrated into school life, so we call it integrated student supports, we're part of the principal's planning team. And we know, look, in this school, we have to focus on math scores because we have all these bubble kids, as they're called in testing, who are right on the bubble. And if we just move their math score, we'll get them across the finish line. So what's precluding them from doing well in math? Well, we do a needs analysis, and we might find that it's hunger, or we might find that it is court-involved parents. It's different in every school. And again, it's the thing I like very much about this model is it's tailored to local needs. We talk a lot about local control in education. This is a local control model. Our affiliates or our licensees are in a local community. They don't work for me at the national office. They're independent. And they're doing a needs assessment and then providing community resources directly to that school. And sometimes they look different from school to school within the same district.
On the other side of that, it's a labor-intensive kind of intervention, but the power of partnerships.
Correct.
And that's how you're able to kind of have such a wide range. It's not communities in school offering all these things. It's everyone around it.
That's correct. That human router that my founder talks about, we don't always provide direct service. Some of our folks are social workers and they will directly provide counseling, but more often they will broker in a mental health provider or a food pantry or a clothing drive or whatever is needed. I think we have today over 8,000 partners in our network across 2,500 schools. So our name is what we do. We bring communities inside schools. There is that caring adult who builds really important developmental relationships with kids. Many of our kids don't have those kind of relationships at home for whatever reason. And so their site coordinator becomes often the primary caring adult in their life to set examples for them and to make sure that they are able to write their own story. I don't like people to think about this program as sort of old style wraparound services or as charity or a handout. Our kids want to succeed just like anybody else's kids, regardless of their zip code where they were born. And this program, I think, underneath that surface of food, clothing, shelter, transportation, or the brokering of services, this program really lights a spark inside kids because somebody expresses an interest in them. And so they go on to succeed on their own. We can't case manage them forever. We don't follow them after post-secondary life typically. But our goal really is to empower them, that they write their own story.
Education, everyone's looking for a success. How to do this, and there's these isolated incidents, isolated organizations are able to do something positive in education, and then the scale problem.
Yeah.
How do you get out of the founder? How do you get it outside of the original people
Yep.
into? And so you're an affiliate link as well, so you don't have those direct controls, and so that issue.
Yeah.
How does communities in school kind of
Yep.
address that?
That's a great question. The issue of scale with fidelity to a model has really been the work of the last 12 to 15 years. Once we perfected a model based on external evaluation and we knew here's what the integrated student supports process looks like, dosage looks like this, number of staff looks like this, work with students has to cover these 10 goal areas. Once we had that, it's a little easier to replicate. You can train site staff in any school district to follow that model. And then part of their training allows them to perfect the local needs assessment and draw from their community. Harder when you're in a rural community and they're not services or broker versus if you're in urban Atlanta or Chicago where you have lots of services. But again, that rigorous training to our standards has how we've done it. So we have a accreditation process. Everybody who executes the full CIS model goes through accreditation every 3 years. They have to meet the student support standards. And then because they are essentially a business, a nonprofit corporation, they have to meet some business standards as well, things about risk to the brand, but also more importantly to young people. So having permission slips and permission of a guardian to do the work. So we instituted a total quality system first probably 12 years ago. It's been revised once, and it really is about assuring fidelity. And so that's how we can replicate. Scale then becomes a question of money and time. And so because of the way the federal act is written in education and a number of other federal programs and many states, this program qualifies for public dollars because we have an evidence base. And so we leverage in some communities about $1 for dollar. We raise money privately in philanthropy, and then we qualify for about $1, an equal dollar of public money. That has enabled us to reach those 2,500 schools and 1.6 million kids, the largest program of our kind. And that all sounds great, and I'm really proud of that. But if you think of most of my kids as Title I kids, 25 million kids in America qualify for free and reduced price lunch. They are Title I kids. And if you cut that a different way, something like 12 million kids live below the poverty line. So even though my organization is the biggest and we are scaling and we use public dollars, we have a long way to go. And that's what brings us to Arkansas. We're in communication with your community here at the school and folks in your district about how does this look in a place like Little Rock and in a state like Arkansas? What resources might be available? What are you already doing that we might be able to help do better through our fidelity, our standards, our training? And for a policy institution like the Clinton School, what are the policy underpinnings that might have to change here? How could the school help your governor and your legislature or your members of Congress think about this work?
What's your biggest hurdle to success?
Time. I always say time is short, and it's the thing that keeps me up at night. Every year that we take to grow, and we'll grow this year by, I think, 100,000 students across the country. But every year that I capture 100,000 more kids into my 1.6 million family, tens of thousands of other kids progress or don't. They drop out, or their trauma impedes their academic performance, which then it sort of is a self-fulfilling cycle. So it really is time. We've been at this for 42 years. When our founder created the organization, he really envisioned a 100-year arc of change. And I always say, I'm an impatient old man. I don't want to wait 100 years. I don't want to wait 60 more years. I really benefited from a public education, as did my children. And I will tell you, the things I see in schools in this country break my heart, because if my folks are not there to help light that spark within kids, their future's kind of bleak. And so it really is, for me, time. There are resources, there are programs, there are people to do this work, but we have to get through to every community and have a lengthy conversation, because every community wants to do it in the local way, which is appropriate. But all that takes time.
Closing thoughts?
I'm just really glad to be here. This is an exciting time in public education. More and more school districts and state departments are thinking about the whole child. When I was a state chief in Nevada, we were very focused on testing. We were very focused on high standards. And I was fortunate to work for a governor who created set-asides for kids in poverty or for English language learners. And I'm excited that there's more of that conversation in the country, more conversation about the needs of a whole child, of a whole community, of a whole family. Needs that might be social and emotional. I think that the pendulum has swung in the right direction, because those things are necessary for the conditions for learning to be true. So I'm very hopeful for the schools here. I read lots of good conversation, good healthy conversation here in Little Rock and in your state department. It's not easy work. But I'm very excited to be here to be part of that conversation. I hope we can offer some ideas for folks. And as I say, across the country, I think it's a positive time for public schools. I think we're going to let schools do what they really want to do for all kids. Because as I say, I always want a student who's a CIS student today to have my job someday. I want them to grow up to get what I got and be president of really one of the finest youth-serving organizations in the country.
Thank you for listening to Clinton School Presents. You've been listening to Dale Erquiaga, President and CEO of Communities in Schools. You can listen to past interviews online at clintonschoolpodcasts.com.